The prairie was still as bone. Not dead, just holding its breath. The wind hadn't moved in hours, and the sun hung low like a dull blade across the horizon. Dust clung to everything: fence posts, thorn brush, even the boy's skin where it caked with blood and dried sweat. He hung from a stretch of barbed wire like an afterthought, shirt torn open back, curved like a broken scarecrow. No shoes, no name, no one coming. The buzzards had found him first, 3 of them sitting like judges above his head, quiet, calculating. But the coyotes hadn't come yet. That meant he still had time. Maybe minutes, maybe less. That's when Maya Greywind rode into view, just as she always did, slow and near silent, her faded pony walking with a limp that matched her own. Her braids were long but thinning, streaked with gray. A hunting bow sat slung across her back, worn smooth from decades of sun but untouched in years. She didn't stop for much. Not for rusted signs, not for thunder, not even for men shouting in town who thought her name was cursed. But something about the boy hanging there, not crying, not fighting, just breathing like he wasn't sure why, made her pull the reins. Maya hadn't meant to care, not anymore, not since her sisters were taken and her homeland burned. She lived now in the hills above Painted Bluff, in a hut made of cedar bark and memory. Folks said she was part ghost, part witch, but the truth was simpler. She was a woman who had learned that being alone was safer than being left behind again. Still, she dismounted, moved slow. Her hands were calloused and steady as she unwound the barbed wire from the boy's wrists. He didn't flinch. He barely blinked. But when she tipped a canteen to his lips, his mouth moved, tried to say something. Failed. "You're not dead," she said to him in Comanche, "so there's still a reason you're breathing." She didn't expect him to understand, but she meant every word. It took her nearly an hour to get him on her pony, and longer still to reach her lodge, tucked near the base of Elder Rock, where the creek ran cold even in summer. The boy, maybe 13, maybe 15, was all bone and bruises. His back bore old scars, the kind you get from whips and fire. His legs were swollen and his feet bled with every jostle of the trail. Maya said nothing, just rode, just brought him home. She boiled water with sage, cleaned his wounds with ground yarrow. She spoon-fed him broth thick with root and bone, wiped his face with a damp cloth. When he cried in his sleep, she didn't hush him. She just let the fire crackle and whispered to the shadows like someone who'd seen too many people die to pretend anymore. 3 days passed before the boy could speak. "Am I dead?" he rasped one night. Maya looked at him long and even then poured cool water into a carved wooden bowl. "You're not dead," she said in English this time. "But you were close. Why'd you save me?" He asked, voice like gravel. She shrugged. "Because you didn't care if I did or not. That's the kind of boy who might still become something." He looked at her, hard, like he was trying to believe her and not quite ready. "They used to call me half-breed," he whispered. "Dog, mule, trash. What did you call yourself?" He didn't answer. "You were born," she said. "You bled. That means you get to choose your name." Later, when she asked what name he wanted, he just shook his head. "You'll know," he said, almost daring her to believe it. And Maya, for the first time in years, did. The mornings came slow in the hills above Painted Bluff. Mist crawled between the cottonwoods, and the creek spoke in its quiet language of melt and stone. Luca, as Maya called him in her mind, not because he told her, but because she couldn't keep thinking of him as boy, still couldn't sit up on his own. The bruises on his ribs bloomed dark as plum skin. She changed his bandages every day, working in silence. And when he winced, she simply said, "You'll live, not as a threat, not as comfort, just a truth." She cooked thick porridge from acorn meal and wild oats, fed it to him by horn spoon. When his fever peaked on the second night, she stripped him to the waist and rubbed his skin with cedar oil and cold creek water. The boy's eyes fluttered and he muttered words she couldn't make out, half prayers, half nightmares. She never asked what he saw behind those eyelids. She already knew wire smoke boots and pain. By the fourth day, he was able to lift the water bowl on his own. He drank greedily, spilling half down his chest, and wiped his mouth on the back of his wrist. "You should have left me," he whispered. Maya didn't glance up from grinding herbs in her stone bowl. "Didn't feel like it. You don't even know me. Don't have to." "What if I ain't good?" he asked after a long pause. She stopped grinding, looked up. "Then you learn to be. That's what breath is for. That shut him up." Not because she'd scolded him, Maya never raised her voice, but because no one had ever said something like that to him. Not the men who raised him, not the lawmen who cursed him, not even the priest who once pressed a Bible into his hands like it was supposed to fix the hurt. On the sixth day, Luca tried to stand. The hut smelled of pine smoke and smoked meat. The floor cool beneath his bare feet. He rose a few inches, legs wobbling, then collapsed back onto the fur-padded floor with a grunt. "You trying to impress me?" Maya asked from the doorway, a small bundle of firewood in her arms. "No," he muttered. "Just tired of being a sack of bones." "Then quit proving you are." The boy looked at her sharply, then away. "You always talk like that, only when someone's listening." She tossed the wood beside the hearth and crouched to light the fire. Her hands moved with practiced calm, dream moss flint breath. Within minutes, the flames were licking high, golden-orange shadows dancing across the hut's low ceiling. Later that evening, as dusk settled and cicadas began to sing, he asked, "You ever lose someone?" She didn't answer right away, just stirred the pot hanging over the flames. "Many," she said at last. "Sisters, mother, brother, how'd you live with it?" Maya lifted her eyes, black as the river after rain. "Didn't. I walked away from it. Far enough the hurt couldn't speak anymore." "Did it work?" "No," she said, "but it changed the sound." Luca leaned back against the hut wall, his breath still short, his limbs trembling, but his eyes were steady. "They left me out there like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. They needed you to believe that," she said. "That's how they kept you tied." He blinked, even when the wire was off, especially then. Silence filled the space between them, thick and honest. She didn't rush to break it. She let it sit because some things have to stretch before they can heal. By the 8th morning, he could help gather wood. Maya showed him which twigs snapped sharp and which crumbled with rot. She taught him to spot tracks in the soil, raccoon, fox, jackrabbit, and how to build a snare with nothing but a bent branch and sinew. He began to ask questions, not just about survival, but about her, why she lived alone, why she didn't speak to townsfolk, why she carved birds into the bark of the cottonwood outside. "One for each year I didn't die," she said. Luca nodded as if that made perfect sense. At night he sat cross-legged near the fire, fingers stained from bark and coal, listening as Maya told him stories. Not the kind meant to entertain, the kind meant to pass down, of rivers that once ran red with buffalo blood, of villages buried under churches, of names forgotten because no one left to speak them. He didn't know why, but those stories mattered to him. They dug into his chest the way nothing else ever had. On the 9th night, he woke screaming. Maya was already there, hand on his shoulder, steady as stone. "They were laughing," he said between gasps. "When they tied me up. Said no one'd care. Said even the dogs stopped barking." Maya didn't tell him it was okay. She didn't lie. She just stayed, sat with him until his breath slowed, until his fists unclenched, until the fire dipped low and morning birds began to stir outside. "You should name me," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You have to earn it." "How?" by deciding who you are when no one's watching. From then on, he tried harder, not to impress her, but to prove something to himself. He boiled his own water, cleaned the snares, even tried carving. When he cut himself, he wrapped it without complaint. He still winced at loud noises, still flinched when birds flew too close. But his back straightened when he walked, and his voice no longer cracked with fear when he spoke. One day, as they cleaned fish by the stream, he said, "You know, I never really had anyone sit with me before, not without hurting me." Maya looked at him and nodded once. "Then I hope you remember how it feels." Luca didn't respond. He didn't need to. In his silence, he was finally starting to become someone. The 10th morning brought a different kind of quiet. Not the calm kind, but the one that presses on your chest like a warning. Birds had stopped singing. Even the creek, always chattering over stones, sounded distant. Maya noticed first the twitch in her pony's ears, the way the smoke from their fire drifted sideways instead of up. She stepped outside, eyes narrowed toward the ridge above. Two silhouettes stood there. One dismounted boots, too clean, mouthful of tobacco and swagger. The other remained on horseback, rifle slung across his lap like a casual threat. Inside, Luca froze mid-step, a basket of wild onions in his hand. His breath caught. He didn't have to see their faces, he knew them by sound. The snap of a match, the drag of a boot heel, the way the man with the red beard always spat before speaking. "You're Maya Greywind?" the bearded man asked, walking slowly toward her hut. Maya didn't answer. She stood still as a post, her braids swaying in the breeze. He spat again. "That boy you got in there, he ain't yours." "I didn't say he was." "Well, he damn sure ain't nobody's now. That's what the fence was for. Should have left him to finish dying." The man on the horse chuckled low, like someone who'd seen animals shot for sport. Maya's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed steady. "He didn't finish dying. He finished surviving." The red-bearded man stepped closer just enough for his breath to carry the scent of whiskey and blood. "You don't know what he did. He stole from us. A horse, a bottle, and my good knife. Broke my cousin's arm. Boy's got no respect." "Sounds like you taught him plenty then," Maya replied coldly. Behind the doorway, Luca's fists clenched. He didn't remember breaking anyone's arm, only running. Running until his feet bled, until the stars blurred. But he did remember that knife. It had sliced his thigh when he'd tried to escape once. A lesson they'd said. "I want him back," the red-bearded man growled. "He's ours by law. Ain't no one gonna question it. Not out here." Maya didn't blink. "You had your chance to keep him. You chose a fence and wire." He raised his rifle just slightly, not a threat, not yet, but a suggestion. Inside, Luca stepped forward into the light. Thin still, but taller now. The weeks had hardened his shoulders. His eyes were no longer hollow. "You think I forgot," he said, voice cracking but clear. "I remember what your boots felt like. I remember you laughed when you tied me to that fence." The man turned, startled to see him standing. "Boy, you better watch that mouth." Luca didn't flinch. He stepped out fully, holding Maya's old blade in both hands, gripped tight but not trembling. "I ain't your boy. Not anymore." Maya didn't move. Her face unreadable, but her stance had shifted, a stillness like a coiled mountain cat. "You planning on using that blade?" the man sneered. Luca's knuckles whitened. "Only if you step closer." For a long moment, no one moved, just the wind shifting slightly, catching the smoke from the fire and curling it between them. Then Maya spoke softly but with weight. "You call him dangerous, but you came here armed. You call him thief. But all he ever took was his life back." The man on horseback shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flicked toward the hills behind them. He didn't want to fight, not with this boy, not with this woman. The red-bearded man spat again, but this time with less confidence. Fine, keep him. We'll tell folks the coyotes took him. Hell, maybe they should have. He turned without another word, climbed back on his horse, and rode off without looking back. When they were gone, Luca's arms fell to his sides. The blade clattered against the ground. He sank to his knees, chest heaving. Maya knelt beside him. You were ready to die for me. I would have. I know, she said, but that's not what made you strong. He looked up, eyes glassy. What did you stood up because you knew you were worth it? Not because someone told you, because you believed it even for a second. He didn't speak, just nodded the way someone nods when they don't trust their voice yet. That night by firelight, she handed him a strip of hide. On it a symbol stitched in deep red thread. A mark from her people. What's this, he asked. Something my brother made before the war. I kept it because it reminded me of someone who still saw good even when everything went dark. He ran his fingers over the stitchwork. He'd die in the raids, she nodded, but not before reminding me what it means to choose. Choose where your soul belongs. Luca looked up, hesitating. Do you think I get to choose that now? She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, You already have. The next morning they broke camp, packed light dried meat tools, flint, a water bladder. They didn't speak of the red-bearded man, didn't mention the fence or the past or the fear, because now there was only one direction left to walk. East. Toward the sun, toward the name he hadn't yet spoken aloud, but which Maya had already started to see in him. And as they crested the first ridge, Luca turned and asked, Do you think he'll come back? Maya squinted into the horizon. Doesn't matter, she said, because next time we won't be waiting. They traveled east for 3 days, keeping close to the tree line where the shadows ran longer and the soil held fewer footprints. Maya's pace was steady, never hurried. She moved like someone who'd walked the land. Long enough to know it had a rhythm, and if you didn't listen, it would eat you whole. Luca, still limping on his right foot, tried to match her steps without complaining. Each night they stopped near water, built their fire shallow and shielded. Each morning Maya read the sky and birds before moving again. On the 4th morning she noticed the birds were gone. Not quiet gone. No warblers in the junipers, no doves calling from the low mesquite. Just stillness and wind that smelled too clean. The way it smells before soldiers come. She didn't panic. Maya Greywind didn't believe in panic. But she handed Luca a small satchel filled with dried yarrow and a leather-wrapped bundle of sage. Go check the traps near the river bend, she said. We checked yesterday, he replied, brow furrowed. Check them again. He looked at her. Her jaw was set tight. Her hands didn't tremble, but they moved slower than usual. Deliberate, like someone bracing for something she couldn't see yet. Burn the sage if you see men in uniform, she added. And don't run unless they see you. He didn't ask more questions, just nodded and left with the quietness Maya had taught him. By midday the riders came, 7 of them mounted and quiet. No bugles, no flags. But the blue of their coats, dulled by dust and sun, marked them clearly U.S. cavalry. The leader was lean and pale, a face built for drawing lines and issuing orders. He dismounted with a calculated grace, brushing dust from his sleeves like he had time to kill. Ma'am, he greeted, eyes scanning the hut, the fire pit, the surrounding brush. I'm Captain Ellis Warren. We're looking for someone. Maya said nothing. He waited a beat, then continued. White boy. Mixed blood, possibly. Escaped custody during a prisoner transport. Young, dangerous. Might be injured. Might be traveling with locals. Still, she didn't blink. The captain motioned toward the men behind him. We believe he attacked a rancher, stole government property, and assaulted a Union corporal. Maya folded her arms. Before or after he was tied to a fence and left for buzzards that stopped him. I beg your pardon. She stepped forward slow and measured. You say he's dangerous, but the only thing he was guilty of was surviving men who already wrote him off. The air around them changed. A tension pulled taut between uniforms and Braid's guns and silence. He's a wanted man, Warren said. He's a boy who was beaten, burned, and broken, and he's still standing. That should scare you more than any pistol. The captain's hand drifted toward his belt where a revolver hung too heavy for words. You're harboring a fugitive, he said. I'm protecting a child. Is he yours? Maya didn't blink. He is now. Behind them, one of the horses pawed nervously. The wind shifted again. We'll be camping near the ridge, the captain said finally. You have until morning to reconsider what side of the law you want to stand on. She didn't reply, just watched them leave. They didn't go far, just up the slope where they could see her hut and keep an eye on anyone who came or went. But Luca didn't come back. Not that day, not the next. Because Maya had taught him better. He moved like shadow, low to the earth, breath shallow. He'd learned how to slip between sagebrush and cottonwood without snapping a twig. He slept beneath boulders and in dry riverbeds, ate sparingly jerky and cattail root, and watched their campfires from a ridge they hadn't even noticed. When they bathed in the creek, he studied their boots, their habits, how often the sentries rotated. He didn't run, he didn't panic, instead he watched. And when the time came, he struck without a blade. On the third night, under a sliver of moonlight, Luca crept into their camp. He was barefoot, face streaked with ash, and his pockets full of crushed yarrow and mushrooms. Maya had told him never to eat raw, not unless you wanted to empty your stomach and then some. He found their coffee satchel, quiet, careful. He poured the powder in, stirred with his finger, and backed away into the dark like a ghost. By sunrise, the soldiers were sick, all of them, vomiting behind trees, cursing the land, collapsing into the grass like men who had forgotten they weren't invincible. Maya stood in front of her hut, Braid looped tight, arms crossed. Luca walked out from the trees beside her, not grinning, not proud, just ready. Time to leave, she said. He didn't argue. They traveled for a full day deeper into land Maya hadn't walked in years. A place where the wind carried no names and even the trees leaned like they didn't want to be found. When they stopped to rest, Maya built a fire from juniper branches and watched Luca tend to the pot. His hands moved with care. His shoulders had filled out. He didn't flinch when the fire popped or when thunder rumbled in the distance. That night, as the fire danced low and the stars spread like paint above them, he spoke. I would have come back for you. Maya stirred the coals. I know. They would have killed me. Maybe, but I would have come anyway. She didn't speak right away. Then finally, you didn't need to come back for me. You just needed to come back to yourself. He looked into the flames. His eyes didn't dart anymore. Time passed like river water, slow but steady, carving away the jagged edges. They didn't keep track of days anymore. Only signs when the birds returned to the cottonwoods, when wild onions bloomed, when the first frost kissed the rim of the fire pit. Maya never said it aloud, but she watched Luca change, the way his shoulders no longer slumped, the way he carried his weight evenly across his feet. His hands had stopped shaking and his voice held more stillness than apology now. He woke early, hauled water from the creek, learned to gut fish with his eyes open and his stomach steady. Once he caught a squirrel in a snare and let it go. Not because he pitied it, but because he knew there was enough dried meat in the pouch for both of them that night. We don't always have to take, he said, shrugging. Maya only nodded. but her eyes lingered on him longer than usual. In the cool dawns, he practiced fire starting without flint, just cordage and friction. Some days it worked, some days it didn't, but he never swore anymore when it failed, only tried again. That was the biggest change Maya noticed. He didn't rage at the world when it resisted. He moved with it like water between rocks. One morning he returned from the creek with both hands cupped around something small. "Found him on his back," he said. Maya looked down and saw a turtle, tiny cracked shell legs flailing. He was stuck. Would have died if I hadn't flipped him. "Why'd you bother?" she asked. He knelt, placed the turtle gently in the grass, and said, "Maybe because someone once flipped me back over." Maya didn't smile, but she sat beside him close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You remember that," she said, "next time you want to walk away from something." That night they ate rabbit stew, thick with dandelion greens. After they shared stories, not out of obligation, but from a place that needed to unburden itself. She told him about her youngest sister, the one who used to tuck sunflower seeds into her hem and plant them behind their lodge. "They never grew," Maya said, "but she planted them anyway, said they needed a chance even if the earth said no." Luca, who still hadn't picked a name, told her about a dog he once had. "Mutt, one-eye crooked tail, slept beside me every night until the day he didn't." He murmured, "Guess he knew when I wasn't worth sticking around for. Or maybe Maya said he knew you were strong enough to sleep alone." He didn't argue, just stirred the fire with a stick until it collapsed inward. On the next full moon, she handed him a bundle wrapped in worn hide. Inside a beaded necklace, blue, dusk-gray riverstone white. It looked handmade old. "I made it for my brother," she said, "before the soldiers came." Luca swallowed. "I can't take this." "You're not taking it," Maya said. "You're wearing it, until you know your name." He ran his fingers along the beads, eyes wet but steady. "What did you call your brother Asa?" she replied. "It means one who listens before speaking." He nodded. "That's something I'd like to be." She didn't tell him he already was, but when he tied the necklace around his throat with hands that didn't tremble, she looked at him with the quiet pride of someone who had watched a seed grow into something tall. That week he brought back a deer, small clean shot. He laid it at Maya's feet without ceremony and waited. She crouched, inspected the wound, touched the hide. "Lucky?" he asked, half grin forming. "No," she said simply. "That wasn't luck. That was earned." And before he could reply, she disappeared inside the shelter and came back holding a stitched scrap of buffalo hide. The symbols on it were old red thread looped carefully in the shape of a name. He took it in both hands. "What is this? It's who you've become." He turned it over. "Kai," he read aloud. "What does it mean?" Maya looked toward the trees. "It means he who chooses where he belongs." The name hit him like a sunrise, slow at first, but warming everything. He whispered it once, then again, "Kai." For the first time since he'd arrived, he smiled without fear. Not a boy anymore, not a stray, just a person, whole, named. They didn't go back to the hut, didn't speak of the wire fence or the buzzards, not because they were afraid, but because Kai had chosen forward and Maya had chosen not to fear the world taking from her again. They traveled light, trapped only what they needed. Tanned hides, chewed cedar brewed teas that kept the sickness away. Sometimes they passed near settlements, watched from the edge, then vanished again. No one chased them now. In every place they camped, Kai carved a symbol into the nearest tree, a circle with a single line through it. "What's it mean?" Maya asked once. He looked at her shoulders, broad now, eyes soft. That someone lived here who wasn't supposed to die in silence. She didn't ask again. Years passed. Kai's voice deepened. His frame thickened with labor and sun, but the gentleness never left his hands. He fed birds from his palm. He stitched hide with even lines. He listened before he spoke. Then one spring down by the water a girl appeared. Her name was June Willow. Hair like tangled moss, voice like struck flint. She wasn't soft, but she laughed when Kai muttered jokes under his breath, and she came back the next morning with berries and 1,000 questions. 3 moons later, she was living in the cedar grove with them. Maya watched from a distance, said nothing, but that night she sang an old melody Kai had never heard. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It's a song for welcoming someone who never expected to be welcomed." He didn't ask if she meant him or June. He already knew the answer was both. Years folded gently over the hills, and with each passing season the world grew quieter around them. Maya's steps slowed, her braids silvered like frost on winter grass. She spoke less, but when she did, her words carried the clarity of final brushstrokes on a painting already whole. The lodge Kai had built with his own hands stood firm through storms and snow, and June Willow tended to its garden with the same stubborn grace Maya once showed the earth. There were no more fences, no more buzzards, just firelight and the soft hush of a life rebuilt. One evening, as the canyon glowed red with the dying sun, Maya called Kai to her side. She was wrapped in a quilt she'd sewn from scraps, old hides, pieces of threadbare cloth from places long gone. Her voice was softer now, but still strong. "I'm ready to go," she said. His throat tightened. "Where?" She smiled, small, tired, knowing. "To wherever the buffalo go when they're no longer hunted." He wanted to say so many things, that he wasn't ready, that he still needed her stories, her steadiness, her silence that said more than words. But instead, he just took her hand, the one that once untied wire from his bleeding wrists, and held it like it was the first thing that had ever saved him. "Don't name it," she whispered. "Just hold on. That's enough." And he did, all through the night. Until her chest stopped rising and her fingers, though still warm, no longer held back. They buried her beneath a ledge of red rock where the wind sang every morning and the grass swayed like river reeds. Kai placed the piece of hide with her, the one she had stitched his name into. Then he carved a stone marker, no dates, no titles, no tribe, just 7 words: "She gave me back to myself." We don't always get to choose where we begin. Some of us are born into silence, into violence, into places where our names are stolen before we ever learn to speak. But what this story reminds us, what Kai and Maya teach us, is that healing doesn't come from being rescued. It comes from choosing to live like we're worth saving. Maya didn't rescue Kai because she saw a hero. She rescued him because she saw a spark, not bright but stubborn, in a boy left for dead. And Kai didn't survive because someone told him how. He survived because he decided to become someone who no longer bowed his head. The journey from Luca to Kai was never about vengeance or proving himself to the men who hurt him. It was about looking inward and saying, "I belong where I choose to belong." That's what makes healing radical. That's what gives redemption its fire. And Maya, a woman who lost everything, didn't fade away. She chose to pass on what no one gave her: a second chance, a name, a place in the world not built by blood but by bond. You don't have to come from wholeness to offer healing. You don't have to be born into love to know how to give it. Sometimes all it takes is someone staying beside you, quiet, steady, real, long enough for you to remember who you were meant to be. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the quiet ache of loss, the fire of redemption, or the simple beauty of chosen family, we invite you to stay a while. Frontier Reverie is where the forgotten are remembered, where silence speaks, and where every story finds its fire again. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more Western tales of healing, justice, and second chances. And if you know someone who's lost their name, send this their way. Maybe it's time they get it back.